Good afternoon, everybody. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Today, we're going to explore one of the most important issues of the 20th century, the atomic bomb. But specifically, the atomic bomb before Hiroshima, before it was dropped. What did the president know? What did the scientists know? What did the public know, and when did they know it? And what were they basing their opinions on? We're also going to look at the issue of whether or not there was a failure of governance in the 1920s or 30s that could have led to the development of atomic weapons by one of our enemies. Now, remember, it's important to like and subscribe to the channel in order for this channel to grow. So hit the buttons right now, especially the subscribe buttons. You know, we've all been taught a tale about atomic weapons that goes something like this. Before the bomb was actually dropped, the only people in America that were interested in atomic weaponry, well, were the fantasy and science fiction types, you know, the Comic-Con kind of nerds, and that the general public had very little interest or knowledge about atomic weapons. We've also been told that the president himself was ill-informed with respect to the status of the development of atomic weapons until that fateful 1939 letter from Albert Einstein explaining the dire situation and forcing the president to act and develop the Manhattan Project. I'm here to tell you, though, that about 90% of that is wrong. The actual story is much more interesting. So let's dive into it. We're going to start at the beginning of the 20th century with a fellow by the name of Ernest Rutherford. Ernest Rutherford won the Nobel Prize in Physics for his investigations into the disintegration of the elements in the chemistry of radioactive substances. He came up with the concept of a half-life. He identified that certain elements, certain elements like uranium, emit energy, and that within the element itself is contained a vast amount of energy, and that the energy will be emitted at a regular pace, and that half of its energy will be dissipated by a certain time, and that's what's called the half-life. But it left the public with the impression that there's energy in matter. That goes without saying with respect to Albert Einstein's theories, but Einstein wasn't a player at this point in time. While he was doing his research in 1905, he wasn't known in North America till about 1919. So we've got, in 1905 to 1910, we got this concept of matter degrading into other forms of matter and releasing energy. Well, that's enough information for the English language's greatest science fiction writer, H.G. Wells, to come up with a storyline. And in 1914, he publishes a book called The World Set Free. It's very well received. It's published around the world. And it's about a war in 1956 in which all parties have nuclear weapons. He calls them atomic bombs. His atomic bombs are made up of something called pure carolinium, and they have a 17-day half-life, and they continuously explode. It's like a chain reaction. They continuously explode. They're dropped from airplanes. They'll explode above the ground and then continue their destructive explosions till they hit the ground, and they will just continue to have explosion after explosion after explosion, basically forever in ever lessening amounts. The plot of the story results in all the major European capitals being basically destroyed and uninhabitable for hundreds of years. Here's some of what H.G. Wells had to say. We have a source of power so potent that a man might carry in his hand the energy to light a city for a year, fight a fleet of battleships, or drive one of our giant liners across the Atlantic. They're really keen on the ocean liner or battleship power thing. You'll see here another quotes. What did his bomb look like? It was a black sphere 2 feet in diameter. And here's how he described it going off. And he describes 3 separate explosions, 3 separate bombs. It says here, the bomb flashed blinding scarlet in midair and fell a descending column of blaze, eddying, spiraling in the midst of a whirlwind. Then with respect to the next one, when he could look down again, he was looking down upon the crater of a small volcano. In the open garden before the imperial castle, a shuddering star of evil splendor spurted and poured up smoke and flame towards them like an accusation. And with respect to the third, a third column of fire rushed, eddying down upon the doomed buildings below. Such was the crowning triumph of military science, the ultimate explosive, that it was to give the decisive touch to war. War would now be it would decide all issues. It was decisive. Now, I mentioned that Wells wrote that story with just the knowledge that Rutherford had given him. In 1919, Einstein appears on the scene, and he amps up the game. Here's the first time his name appears in a Western newspaper. It's in the Guardian, and I'm going to read just what they wrote, and you can make your own assumptions of the politics of the Guardian. It says here, Dr. Albert Einstein, whose discovery concerning the relativity of the dimensions of space was described at yesterday's meeting of the Royal Society as the most remarkable since the discovery of Neptune, is a Swiss Jew about 50 years of age. That's how they describe him. His exceptional brilliance as a physicist was recognized on the continent some years before the war. So he's known there, but he's publishing in German. So it's 15 years after he makes some of his discoveries that we finally hear about him here. It says he's earning the princely sum of 900 pounds a year to be a professor in Berlin. And he makes this comment. They make this comment. When he offered his last important work to the publisher, he warned them that there were not more than 12 persons in the whole world who would understand it. Well, they might not understand the math, but his concept of space and time has become part of our culture. The public was certainly capable of engaging in his ideas. Now, in 1922, remember, this is 1922, so 23 years before they dropped the atomic bomb, this is an article that appeared around the world. I'm quoting from the Evening Express of Liverpool, but it's June 19th, 1922, and it's the opinion of an anonymous physics professor at Oxford. Release of atomic energy probable. Vast forces. New theory of space and time. We are on the eve of scientific discoveries so sensational and so far-reaching a character as to render Einstein's theory by comparisons child play. And now this is where he's a little prescient here. I predict that within the next 5, 10, or at the outside 20 years, man will be able to say, I have harnessed the atom. Pretty good. But he gets into the minutiae of how this is all going to play out. Einstein proved that we live, so to speak, in a space distorted like the space behind a convex mirror. We shall have to revise all our existing conceptions of time and space. We shall have to scrap all the laws of physics as accepted from the days of Newton onwards for the simple reason that, if applied to atomic phenomena, they are not only inadequate but utterly wrong. Then he gets in the nuts and bolts of atomic energy. The energy stored in such elements as thorium and uranium is stupendous. In 1 ton of uranium, there is as much potential power as in 1,000,000 tons of coal, and it only needs the knowledge of how to ignite it, how to cause the atoms to break up when we desire, to make this power immediately available. He's right. It's a problem now of applied physics, doing the experiments that determine how to break up the atoms and make them respond to our commands. It goes, the cost and weight of atomic energy will be negligible. One man would be able to carry, without effort, sufficient fuel to drive a large liner from Southampton to New York. I see no reason why we should not be able to go to the moon before the century is over. I'd like to know who this fellow was. He's just listed as anonymous. Then, with respect to an atomic bomb, then consider the possibilities of war. And this is what's important. The first nation to discover the secret will be in a position to wipe out all the other nations literally in a quarter of an hour. Ominous. It could send over an airplane with a 2,000-pound bomb, which would have as devastating an effect as that of 1,000,000 airplanes carrying 2,000 bombs, though presently they're being used day to day. What he's getting at is the power is unlimited. It's not only is it unlimited, it's definitive. It's the single most important thing that is going on in the world at that time. And he's predicting it with uncanny character. He concludes that I am not discussing remote but immediate prospects. The question is, which nation will be the one to develop the atomic weapon? So there he is. He's laid it out for us. He's shown us exactly how it's to be done and what the consequences are. Yet no nation on earth acted. Not even the next month when another article comes out on the Springfield Leader and Press, and again it was shown around, it was reprinted around the world. Tinkering with angry atoms may blow up the earth. Well, you can't get any more specific than that. They're outlining quite a threat here. Now, a couple years later, in the Leicester Mercury, headline, Science, Savior or Destroyer. Paradoxical as it may seem, the progress of science is not only the greatest boon, but the greatest menace of our time. They then conclude, and we have heard repeatedly of the disastrous consequences that may follow upon the release of atomic energy, which today is regarded as a possibility of a future none too remote. It's coming, and they're warning us repeatedly. The atomic bomb, evolved by the imagination of H.G. Wells, may yet come to pass. They're laying out the path, and they're showing what the consequences are. But what country would want to develop something like this? Nobody would know. Nobody's got such evil intentions, right? Well, here's a fun article from the Evening Express, August 5th, 1924. Headline, Breath of Death Gas. Germany is preparing with all her strength for a new scientific war. In laboratories of Germany, the chemists retained by the government research department are working with feverish energy on various experimental ideas connected with mass destruction. States in the article, the next war will be the war of revenge, is what he's calling it. It says here, yet if atomic energy were harnessed so as to become a destructive agent, it would surpass in its effect anything imaginable to the human mind. And as a great English scientist explained, it would be defying the laws of God to dare to meddle with such fearful forces. Well, someone's going to do it. Perhaps the United States of America, with their virtually unlimited resources, should be the one. But nobody did. Research continues around the world at this point in time. What you got to realize is that there is no united front of scientists working on this project. There's a few guys in Chicago. There's a few guys in Pasadena. There's a few guys in Harvard, in London, in Berlin. All in all, are there 1,000 guys around the world working on various problems? Maybe. But nothing's going to happen until you get those 1,000 guys or 1,000 other guys with 165 IQs trained in physics into a room and work on the project and pay them for their services. But no one seems to think it's worthwhile yet. Now, what does the general public know? If they read these articles, they would certainly know. But what if they're not fellows who read the newspaper? Well, let's have a look at the Sun Journal of Lewiston, Maine of March 16, 1929. Headline is Robot and Science in New York Drama. So they're talking here about, they're reviewing plays on Broadway. Wings Over Europe is chosen this month as the play that is talked about by Theatre Magazine. Wait a second, Wings Over Europe. Isn't that H.G. Wells' play? Well, anyways, let's see what the plot of this one is. Or H.G. Wells' story, novel. They couldn't actually be describing something that could happen, could they? Well, listen, look at this. The play is set at number 10 Downing Street, London, England, and the cabinet is face-to-face with a young scientist who has discovered the secret of the atom, of all atomic energy, which is the force that holds the world together. So what's the cabinet going to do? What's the prime minister and cabinet going to do faced with this incredible scientific discovery? The cabinet finds the invention so dangerous it orders that the young scientist destroy its secret. Well, that's really going to work, being an ostrich. You're going to destroy your secret, and then Heinrich somebody or other in Berlin is going to come with it 2 weeks later, and you're just behind the 8 ball. But that's what they say to do. He refuses, and they would use force, but they receive a message that the League of United Scientists also has the secret, and as they speak, airplanes are over every European capital. Well, that's ominous, and that's playing on Broadway. So all of New York now knows of atomic weapons and what their consequences are. Another play. This is fun. The Buffalo News, Saturday, January 14th, 1933. The headline is Diplomacy Pinned on Barb of Satire. It's a satirical play, but the plot is kind of interesting. There's an island in the Persian Gulf, of all places, that has a mineral, has an ore, and that ore is particularly useful in developing atomic weapons. And they get into the consequences of said atomic weapons. But the farce is the government, people in the government are trying to control it. And it's their opinion, the opinion of the authors, according to the headline, is the impression is that it's largely stupidity and lies, is that the people involved in the process of obtaining the ore are basically liars and cheats. Now, we mentioned earlier in the opening that there was a general impression that it was comic book kind of guys, it was fantasy and science fiction kind of people that were interested in nuclear weapons, Buck Rogers kind of guys. But that's not necessarily so. Here we have the Kansas City Journal, March 14th, 1933. There was a comic strip called Connie that ran from 1927 to 1941, dealt with the exploits of Connie Courage. It's kind of a Dick Tracy action-adventure kind of thing. Now, here's the strip from March 14, 1933. Great heavens, it's one of those atomic bombs, and it's set for 12 o'clock. Once they're set, they can't be changed. Good night, it must be nearly 12 now. Get out quick, everybody. This thing goes off in 2 minutes. So atomic bombs are now the subject of general comic strips. They might appear in Snoopy in the 1950s. But anyways, in any event, the public is certainly being kept informed of the consequences and effects of nuclear weapons. 1933. That's a particularly interesting and important year. A lot of the final foundational physics is done in 1933. After 1933, all that's left to be done is the development of nuclear chain reactions and the actual production of the bomb. That's the Manhattan Project kind of stuff. But what goes on in 1933 lays the groundwork for the Manhattan Project. Here's the first article from the Montreal Gazette, July 5th, 1933. Chemistry opens up new field for research workers. A new chapter in chemistry will be written around the recent discovery of a hydrogen atom of double the usual mass. What they found is that there were hydrogen atoms that had two protons. And so they were using these, they were able to use that as what they described as a bullet to shoot off, to accelerate that particle and shoot it off another particle. And when they hit, they released tremendous amounts of energy. And what they say here, it is a veritable bomb of light. Speaking of shot, the votaries of the modern chemical laboratory have been able to separate the smaller particles from the larger particles and use the lesser shot for the purpose of exploding the atomic bomb. And whenever these protons, as they are called, make a direct hit, enormous energy is thereby released. The atom is shattered. So the foundational work with respect to splitting the atoms is being done in 1933. Here in the Gazette Daily, York, Pennsylvania, March 3rd, 1939, is really the final piece of the puzzle. Because remember, all that had to be done up to that point in time was figuring out how to do a chain reaction. Headline, exploding uranium atoms may set free neutrons for other explosions. They're describing what happens in a chain reaction. Exploding atoms of uranium may set each other off in a chain like sticks of dynamite laid in a row. It has been found that the splitting of uranium by neutrons also produces another neutron, which potentially could have the power to disrupt a neighboring uranium atom. This makes a continuous cycle of atom destruction and brings about a continuous release of atomic energy after the initial trigger action. So they're describing a chain reaction. One hits, splits, shoots other particles off, strikes others. They continue. That's the chain reaction. It says here that Professor Niels Bohr and Professor Enrico Fermi, both Nobel Prize winners, were among the eminent men who were present at the meeting at which the discovery was announced. So everybody knows it's 1939. This is when it's after this that Einstein's letters come out, but the work's all out here. It's all in the newspaper. If FDR just wants to read the paper, he's going to find out what the situation is. Now, there's an analysis of that taking place in the Daily World newspaper of June 18th, 1939. It says, element 2 million times as powerful as coal is studied. It says here, if 1 gram of the element known as uranium-238, and aren't we getting a little specific here? Now, we're going to get all these discussions about uranium-235 and uranium-238. They're discussing, I thought, in the narrative we've been taught, I thought that these things were all state secrets and that nobody knew about this sort of thing, and if anyone knew, they didn't care. But here we are. If 1 gram of the element known as uranium-238 starts to burn, it releases 2.5 million times as much energy as a gram of burning coal. Ordinary uranium does not seem to offer much hope of releasing its atomic energy, but the special type of uranium that has a weight of 235 or 238 does offer possibilities of releasing its vast energy. The problem then is to turn ordinary uranium into these special kinds of uranium known as isotopes of uranium. Well, ain't that the problem that the Iranians are having? I guess if you're going to do that sort of thing, you got to buy yourself some centrifuges and maybe some cyclotrons and things, but you're really going to need those centrifuges. But here's what how the article deals with that. Apparatus worth a king's ransom and made of pure platinum or gold must be used in these devices. It says here, equipment costing from $50,000 to $100,000 might find the answer. Fantastic though such costs would be, the price would be worthwhile if a new kind of power source could be created. Well, let's see how fantastical $50,000 to $100,000 was at the time. I'm going to suggest that it wasn't fantastical at all. If we go back to know now what we now know was spent in World War II, you realize at the time, in the late 30s and through the 1940s, the United States was still building battleships, even though nobody needed a battleship. They actually built a dozen battleships in the 1940s with an average cost, depending on the model, anywhere between $50 and $150 million. They spent $1.5 billion on useless battleships. Well, not 100% useless. They used them for bombarding coastlines, Iwo Jima and things like that, but really? $1.5 billion worth of battleships? And then we've got the tale of the B-29 Super Fortress, the bomber that actually dropped the atomic bomb. But that was only a moderately successful bomber program. It was a wonderful machine and a great luxury, but it was not necessarily necessary to end World War II. And they spent $3 billion developing that one military system. And it's not even a particularly great system, and that is 50% more than was spent on the Manhattan Project, which ultimately spent $2 billion. So the money's there. You could find it. You could have hid the money in the Tennessee Valley Authority budget, calling it electrification research, and they wouldn't even been lying. And don't tell me FDR didn't like spending money on projects. No one just found the need to spend it on this potentially world-changing project. Anyway, here we are in 1940. Italian physicist here to meet Dr. Lawrence in the San Francisco Bulletin.
A dramatic meeting between Dr. Ernest Lawrence, University of California professor who won the 1939 Nobel Prize for his development of the cyclotron, and Enrico Fermi took place yesterday. It says here, this was the Dr. Fermi, asked if he believed atom smashing could possibly be used to generate power. The professor replied that this was not impossible, but the costliness of such a plan would be prohibitive. No, you just got to spend the money. But he did note that the United States is leading the world in scientific work. He declared the present, and here's a great understatement here, the present day European climate does not encourage scientific research. I guess not, since they chased out all the Jewish physicists and generally the totalitarian governments in control at that point in time, hell-bent as they were for war, were not really into the niceties of scientific research. There's an article that appeared across North America. I'm quoting the one here from the Toronto Star on January 18th, 1941. There's an article here that it almost reads like something a spy would have written, because it gets into the minutia of how you develop nuclear weapons and how we're going to develop nuclear weapons. And this is January of 1941, which is a full year and a half before the Manhattan Project comes online. But let's have a look at it. The headline is Mars' secret weapon uranium. Now, Mars, of course, is the god of war, and the secret weapon uranium goes without saying here. It says in the article that we can get all the uranium we need from Canada. I'm glad that they're willing to help out here. And then it breaks down what the effects of nuclear energy and such are. It says a neutron traveling with an energy of 1/30th of a volt smashes a uranium atom and releases 6 billion times as much energy, and at the same time releases 3 more particles like itself, each of which can be slowed down to carry on the same reaction on surrounding atoms. The process accelerating in 4-fold geometric progression. Well, what they're describing, it smash one with the other, it releases protons, they smash other, the reaction continues, and it's 4-fold geometric. It's going off in 4 dimensions. Here was the fantastic chain reaction of which scientists were seeking. They're saying we've got chain reactions here. It says here, in order to produce the chain reaction or continuously release the atomic energy, like a self-supporting fire after the match has been applied, it is necessary to separate the 2 principal kinds of uranium. So you gotta do what they said the other one here. There are 3 units of atomic weight difference between them and some very slight chemical differences. Using these differences, different methods must be worked out for a practical way of separating the 2 kinds of uranium in order to operate atomic energy sources. This has been done on a laboratory scale by Professor Neroff of the University of Minnesota. So they're saying by 41 that one professor in his little lab in Minnesota has done this on a microscopic scale, but it needs to be scaled up. Would somebody please spend some money and do the research here? Again, we're a year and a half for the Manhattan Project. That same article concludes, new terrific energy is the concluding section's heading. What science now knows how to do is this: release about 1/4% of the total amount of energy in matter and transition it into productive or destructive power. As a destructive agent, it provides an estimated 5 million times as much power as TNT, or will produce that much more useful power than any other form of fuel. This energy is obtained by splitting atoms of uranium, the heaviest known element, and in the process transforming a small fraction of its mass into energy. So they're describing fission. They're describing a fission bomb, not a fusion bomb, a fission bomb. I don't know whether this was a fantasy or why else they use this particular example, but I bet you it was a popular one. It says, if a pound of uranium were planted in Berlin and its energy released explosively by now known processes, it would blast a crater 3 miles in diameter and bring destruction to a much greater area. So you take but a pound of uranium, do the nuclear weapon thing on it, and it produces a crater 3 miles wide. A few months later, another article comes out. The Belleville News Democrat, Belleville, Illinois. It says here, headline, U-235 may be Hitler's secret weapon. Element 30 million times more potent than TNT, may revolutionize way of life, scientists say. It's funny how everyone knows that it's 235 and 238, that are the important elements. You'd have thought, like I said, that was part of some kind of great secret. At least, certainly I would have thought that before doing the research here. It says here, U-235 is Hitler's secret weapon. Word coming from Germany recently indicates scientists there may have a big surprise ready to spring on us soon. U-235 is uranium, the number indicating is 235 times It is 235 times heavier than hydrogen. It says here, if it is 30 million times more potent than TNT, and a chunk no larger than your fist will propel a battleship from New York to Liverpool and home again. It says here, American physicists do not yet have at hand enough U-235 for extended research. When supplies become available, well-known authorities say the world will experience advances in industry, science, and everyday living no imagination can encompass. So it's just a matter of applied physics at this point in time. The general scientific consensus is that give us the time, give us the money, give us the equipment, and we can produce as much uranium-235 as we need to develop either nuclear energy or atomic bombs. It says here, the other day a suggestion reached the United States that the Germans have come upon means for extracting and concentrating U-235, which may inaugurate the predicted era of atomic weapons. Well, you better have hoped that the Germans were not that close to developing nuclear weapons here in May of 1941. Finally, they start spending some money on the problem, and the Manhattan Project is inaugurated. In December 1942, we get the development of the first nuclear reactor. This is truly, really secret stuff. You're not going to find anything. The one thing about the Manhattan Project, they're very good at keeping things out of the paper and putting into the paper things, well, that work to their advantage. But here's what was going on behind the scenes in December of 42. At the University of Chicago, Enrico Fermi and a bunch of his buddies were building what they referred to as a nuclear pile in the squash court under the Amos Alonzo Stagg football stadium. They called it Chicago Pile 1. It was a 20-foot tall pile of pure graphite blocks studded with hundreds of blocks of uranium in just the right position to encourage neutrons to smack into one another and then to smack off other neutrons to split other atoms and continue the reaction in that chain reaction. Now, Fermi regulated the pile with control rods, fuel rods that he would insert and remove, and they could increase the rate of the atomic reactions or decrease it. Finally, at 3:53 p.m. on December 2nd, 1942, a self-sustaining nuclear reaction was achieved, and they were doing this in the middle of Chicago. Perhaps not the most responsible scientific research that's ever been undertaken. They realized that this was a little bit risky, so the entire operation was moved to Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And here we get into how good the government was at controlling the flow of information. We have an article here from the Rogersville Review, Rogersville, Tennessee, September 30th, 1943. New town of Oak Ridge is open for business in Anderson County. Down the old English district of Anderson County, there is a new town, Oak Ridge, Tennessee, with complete commercial facilities to take care of the people who are to work permanently at the Clinton Engineering Work and live within the area. So a company town, that's how it's described basically. It's a company town. Clinton Engineering are going to employ these thousands of people, and we're going to build a city for them right outside the gates of the factory. Already, the stores are open, the laundry is in operation, and the post office is doing land office business. There's a motion picture theater, a supermarket, a department store, drugstore, cafeteria, barber and beauty shops. Soon the bank will open, and within a few days, a gasoline service station and a bowling alley. Gotta have your bowling alleys. So that's how they control that information. People might have been poking around like Area 50 wondering what this was. Well, we've got a story. It's just this engineering work putting up this wonderful facility, and we're going to build ourselves a company town. There's an article here in the Latrobe Bulletin of January 18th, 1944 that I can only describe as a nothing to see here story. And it had to be planted by the government, showing, don't look here, we're not working on atomic weapons. Well, here's what it says. In explaining how difficult it would be to develop a truly secret weapon, Dr. Compton says, parallel developments by competing groups are the rule. It is rare indeed that a completely new industrial development catches the world by surprise. If this is true in industry, it is yet more unlikely that the balance of the world's military power will be upset by an idea kept secret from a vigilant enemy. So what he's doing, he's describing exactly what they're doing in the Manhattan Project and saying that doesn't work. To be of conclusive military significance, not only must the idea be perfected, the new weapon must be also adapted to industrial production and be manufactured on a major scale, which is exactly what's going to happen with the Manhattan Project. If we are alert, we should know of any new military development of this kind before it becomes a hazard to nations organized to protect public safety. Well, that is the ultimate nothing to see here story. This is exactly what the government's doing, but the government isn't doing that. And even if they they were doing that, it wouldn't work. You got to do it another way. So that story had to be a plant. This was a fun one. This is January 2nd, 1945. This is how ubiquitous the concept of an atomic bomb is. If you're a hockey fan, you know that one of the great players was Rocket Richard. He was the first guy to score 50 goals in less than 50 games. So here's an article in the Boston Globe. Atomic bomb, Richard, tough problem. With their usual weakness for understatement, Montreal hockey writers have been content to call Maurice Richard by such dull nicknames as Comet, Bullet, and Rocket. In reality, there's only one name that fits the goal glamorous right winger of Les Canadiens. That is the atomic bomb. So now the concept of an atomic bomb is suitable for application in sports. That's how little people knew about atomic bombs. Here's another example of war-related disinformation in the Toronto Star, January 2nd, 1945. It says here, it has been said without confirmation that the Germans moved 5 or 6 divisions from the Eastern Front to the West, and that the underground chambers of the Siegfried defenses facilitated secret concentrations. We cannot say yet whether any atomic bombs were used in the enemy offensive. Berlin suggested that a bomb of that type was used near St. Vith and leveled everything for miles around. The Germans observed that the Allies had no monopoly of atomic bombs. So now everybody's got atomic bombs, even though nobody's got atomic bombs. All belligerents would like to develop atomic bombs, which would have a magic effect. So far, no dependable news has come of the use of such a fantastic weapon. So the Germans might have it. Well, you know what that does? That keeps everyone's eye on the prize. The Germans are evil. They're developing an atomic bomb. Let's give our last full measure here and get rid of these bad, evil humans. Here's an article in the Brooklyn Eagle, January 31, 1945, only a few months before the end of the war in Europe. Sperry head warns Nazi genius may yet create winning weapon. And it's the head of Sperry Gyroscope Company. Sperry became Sperry Rand. It was one of the major defense contractors in America. And they're just saying that in this article that there's enough creative, brilliant people in Germany to beat us to the punch with atomic weapons, and we better watch out if they do. Here's another article outlining or showing this that the Germans are on the cusp, or perhaps even have atomic weapons. It says here, atomic bomb is used on Yanks, Germans boast. A German radio station which has been trying to panic the Belgians ever since the opening of the Nazi offensive, and that's the Battle of the Bulge, said recently that Field Marshal von Rundstedt's forces were using an atomic bomb. This is the type of bomb on which the Allies had claimed to have a monopoly. I'm not sure the Allies claimed to have any atomic bombs, but that's the way the story's reading. It says here, wherever such a missile is dropped, all animals and plants cease to exist. Huge areas of land are scorched, woods are consumed, and any human being caught in the hurricane is shattered to smithereens. Public figures. Atomic bombs and atomic weapons are so unknown that public figures are giving speeches about atomic bombs. This is a speech given by Booth Tarkington, the famous novelist who wrote The Magnificent Ambersons and a bunch of other stuff. He died the next year, but with respect to atomic weapons, he states, militant science now foresees an object which we may call the atomic energy bomb to be projected in quantity to anywhere in the world by the pressing of a button and capable of destroying a city like Chicago so horribly that a human being couldn't safely approach that locality for some months afterwards. And then he goes on saying that, well, maybe we shouldn't do this, and that man is a pretty violent beast. Did you ever wonder how they hid the Alamogordo Trinity explosion? Now, you guys all watched Oppenheimer, right? Well, even if you didn't, you know that they tested the atomic bomb in Alamogordo, New Mexico on July 16th, 1945. And Alamogordo is like 100 miles from Albuquerque and a couple hundred miles from Santa Fe. Certainly anybody in Albuquerque who was awake at the time would have been able to see this. For God's sake, the bomb went off with higher temperatures than the surface of the sun. You were basically creating a second sun on Earth. How that explosion would not be noticed by others. Well, here's the story. Here's what they said. We found this in the Santa Fe, New Mexican, July 16th, 1945. Magazine, let's go at Alamogordo. Explosion of an ammunition magazine at the Alamogordo Air Base reservation this morning. Heard and seen for many miles, was reported today by William Erickson, commanding officer of the air base. There was no loss of life or injuries to persons. Of course not. It was a controlled nuclear explosion. But that's the story that the War Department planted with newspapers to cover up any phone calls that someone might receive, wondering what the heck just blew up, somewhere down the road. Now, August 6, 1945, we've got the dropping of the atomic bomb, the first one here. We've got the New York Daily News, August 7th, 45, headline, Atomic Bomb Rocks Japs, more on way, Truman warns, biggest war secret revealed. Then a beautiful photograph of the factory where they developed, home of the atomic bomb. One thing you don't have in
any of the articles covering the atomic bomb dropping is any explanation of what an atomic bomb is and how it works. That goes without saying. They just comment on it's the atomic bomb and that it blew up, and then they'll go on in exquisite detail to describe what the effects were, such as the Daily News article of August 7th, atomic bomb fury hits Japan, and they outline everything what happened. But they don't have to tell us about the atomic bomb. They never had to tell us about the atomic bomb because the atomic bomb had been in the public imagination for more than 20 years, and any moderately educated or moderately curious person would have, if not a full understanding of the atomic bomb, certainly a working knowledge of atomic weaponry. It was just that, bang, this is it. This is when it actually happened. That was what was important. They even had, ready for immediate release, the War Department even had human interest stories related to atomic weaponry. Here's an article in the St. Louis Globe-Democrat of August 8th, 1945. And the headline is "Censor at Atomic Bomb Center Almost Wrecked Romance" here. And it says, strict security regulations surrounding the development of the atomic bomb nearly wrecked the marriage plans of a Webster Groves couple by interrupting letters between Mark Potter and his fiancée, Miss Doris Allen, who had taken a job as a nurse in a hospital at the special laboratory near Santa Fe, New Mexico, where research was carried out. So they had public interest stories, all kinds of stories ready for release immediately upon the detonation of the atomic bomb. Now, that secondary question, did the United States government do everything they could have done faced with the information that they had? Well, let's look, if we go back even into the 1920s. You had explicit threats backed by science, and you knew exactly what the consequences were. You knew what the consequences were if development of atomic weapon was put in the hands of Hitler, Mussolini, or Stalin, or any of the other nations which let's just say did not value freedom and democracy. And what was important here, one of the important things was, remember, all of the technical work, I'm going to say the theoretical physics had been accomplished by 1933. The rest is applied physics. Building an atomic bomb is a matter of getting, let's just say, 1,000 guys with 165 IQs and physics training into a room and not letting them out till they actually develop it, because it's doable. From the research we have here, once we get past 1933, most of the theoretical problems are resolved. It's just the technical application. The technical applications to developing the actual weapon. This was just a matter of spending money and spending it wisely and getting the right people on board on the project. And this thing could have been started as early as 1933, after the technical problems had been worked, after the theoretical problems had been worked out. And if you'd been able to even spend money at half the rate that was spent during the Manhattan Project, you would have had the development of atomic weaponry by 1939 in time to potentially stop Hitler, in time to potentially prevent the Second World War and save 50 million lives. It could have been done. Should it have been done? In hindsight, we got lucky. In hindsight, nobody else was working on it, but they could have been working on it. The knowledge necessary to build the atomic bombs was almost available in newspapers. It was certainly available in the learned papers of the physicists of the day. It was just a matter of being dedicated to the task and getting the job done. We dodged a bullet. The world dodged a bullet. Had this broken a different way, all heck could have broken loose, even worse than it did. Well, after staring at Armageddon now for the last half hour, you might need a cocktail. And if you did, what better cocktail could you get than the atomic cocktail? The atomic cocktail was popular in Las Vegas in the 1950s. Remember, in the 1950s in Vegas, they were still doing above-ground nuclear tests. So this plays into everything that we've been dealing with today. And it's a nice drink. It's a champagne cocktail. But again, don't use champagne. Any sparkling wine will do. It's 1.5 ounces of vodka, 1.5 ounces of cognac, a teaspoon of Amontillado or sherry, and you top it up with sparkling wine. What you do is you mix all the ingredients in a mixing glass. You add ice and you stir. You strain it into a champagne flute and top up with sparkling wine. And you can garnish with a lemon twist to induce a little bit of bitterness. And you got a nice way to relax after nuclear Armageddon. Well, thanks for staying around to the end, everybody. And we'll be out with another episode of the 100 Years and More show next week. And remember, like and subscribe. It's important for the development of the channel. Take care, everybody.